Hi, I'm Brittany Braga, and this is my video on our issue this week on who will control the internet. Overall, our rating comes down to net neutrality and whether or not the government should regulate the internet. The reading comes in and brings up a lot of instances of Comcast and the FCC fighting in court. The first issue comes from and started the whole train wreck in 2007 when the FCC accused Comcast of slowing and blocking internet traffic from BitTorrent. Comcast claims that they were just evening the playing field for the average internet user that was dealing with weakened speeds because of this minority of users who were causing this file sharing traffic. Another instance, I believe, was right after the FCC issued the open internet order. Comcast had then brought them to court and argued that it was against the FCC's right to regulate the internet. And in this instance, the court ruled in favor of Comcast and agreed that this was against FCC's right. In 2014, the FCC then moves on to propose a compromise, but it wasn't so much a compromise. They brought in this idea of internet service providers or ISPs to have a faster lane package that would allow consumers to pay premium, and this would allow their connection to be prioritized. A lot of people were confused about this and argued against it because this whole new proposed version of net neutrality wasn't really neutral at all. Some of the points made when this was being fought was how there was indeed a finite amount of bandwidth on the internet, and how these would instead be pushed into this fast lane service, and this would force users outside of like these lanes they would be squeezed dry for bandwidth, and they would get the butt of the stick. On top of this, opponents feared how the costs for keeping these fast lanes maintained would skyrocket, and this would not only lead to barriers and obstacles for startups on small budgets, but it would overall stifle the innovation and the competition for these companies. I believe I said this already, but overall this was just an issue of whether or not the government should or should not regulate the internet. Now, we did also have to read about education. This was our technology in context. So at first, the reading goes into just the first educational application of computers. I believe one of the first things you read is how the first few educational tools that were computers were in the 1960s. They were huge mainframes with clunky interfaces. These were introduced to students so they could get used to computer-aided instruction, or CAI. These were very basic drill and practice tools. Basically, student is given a problem, student answers, student is evaluated on these computers. But a study in the 1970s indicated that these programmed instruction systems, although they may have improved test scores, students just became easily bored with like the boring monochromatic displays on them and the strict and repetitive drill format. In more recent years, simulations and gamings and computers are very much used as an educational tool. It's very often that you can see like educational simulations, not only just through video games, but I believe I've taken a few science courses where I had to use like some sort of lab simulation instead of being on campus to do those labs. Now, that was more in the height of COVID, but there are other instances of like the flight simulator game. Well, may be fun, but could actually give you an idea, not of what to expect, but at least to kind of have an idea of how many things you have to maintain. Probably more in the real aspect of it, but you get an idea of how much multitasking it'll take. I believe the book also mentioned an old Battlefield, which was Battlefield 1942, which was sort of funny to me because I wouldn't have thought of it as a game simulation that both educates and whatnot. Later in the reading, I believe the book brings up distance education, also known as DE or just distance learning. Now, I feel like I'll start off with the book defines this as any educational situation in which students and instructors aren't in the same place. Now, I know online school has already been around for a long time, but the initial lockdown in 2020 from COVID, I feel like really set this in stone. It forced a lot of institutions to have a backup and have an online way of learning. I remember I wasn't at Middlesex at the time, but I was at Merrimack, and Merrimack never had an online school service. You had to be on campus to take your classes, and we got an extra week for spring break, and after that, the rest of our semester was online. Now I believe after that they did not stick. They may have done hybrid for a little bit, but then they did not stick to online at all. But I know at Middlesex I haven't gone. I switched to Middlesex and I haven't gone back to on campus. Excuse me. Not only that, but a lot of tools were now being used through the internet for distance learning, such as Zoom. Blackboard I know was already used, but it became a main staple for online classes. I believe they also mentioned DE services. It's under that umbrella of Khan Academy, Coursera, and other educational tools that you could probably either use for free, like Khan Academy. I believe you can pay a premium service on it, or like places like Coursera, where you can pay a fee to do this class that isn't really at an institution, but it's on a site as a whole. And I will finish off the summary by stating, I think I wrote this, and it was based off of the very last sentence of that technology in context, where overall the internet has become a great tool for many individuals to complete or continue their education regardless of where they are in life or what they could be dealing with currently. Now I will get into the triads because I know I was taking a bit to get to that. But the first question, I believe we had to look up the current status of net neutrality. And they did give us a website, but I could not find any relating articles, and I don't know if I just didn't see it and was a little bit blind, but I ended up just Googling it to figure out what's going on. As far as I know, this was an article on CNET, I believe. I'm sorry if I read that or say that wrong, but within the last month this article was posted, and it mentions how new appointees under President Joe Biden are making it a top priority to now reinstate President Obama's net neutrality rules that were initially eliminated under President Trump's administration. Now, to move forward, because I know it was taken off by President Trump, but now I believe Biden is working to reinstate it. Our next question asks us to look into our cell phone bill and to look into how many taxes and fees we pay. So I do have a plan under Sprint and T-Mobile. It's a little bit weird. They've merged in more recent years. So I was initially just under Sprint, but now I don't know to just call it Sprint or T-Mobile. I usually just say Sprint T-Mobile. I don't have a separate phone bill. My phone is still on my parents' bill, and my brother's phone is still on it. So we may pay a little bit extra in taxes per month than maybe someone with a single phone bill. But according to our last bill cycle, we paid almost $8 in just government taxes and fees, excuse me. Now, there was another surcharge section that had around like $14, $15, and I don't know if that ties in as taxes or if they just call it or if it's something else entirely. I don't know. But in the government taxes and fees section, it was almost $8, and that's per month. So the third question asks us to go to a government website to read the Communications Act of 1934. We have to examine it and answer if the wording in the act appears to also apply to the internet. I say yes, I believe it does. I know technically the internet is not under it, but I feel as if the wording would allow it to be. I feel like the internet is a great tool for communication. If anything, it's mainly used as a form of communication, either through calls on apps such as Skype, which I know isn't as popular anymore, maybe Facebook Messenger, Discord, stuff like that, messages, some sort of like email service, or Skype, Discord again, something to message in. Social media is a great connection tool, etc., etc. And because of this, I feel like it should apply to the internet, because the internet is mainly used as a form of communication to either someone outside of your state, outside or in your state, outside of the city, or even just someone who just isn't in the country as a whole. It's a great tool to connect with people. Now, question 4, it asks us to look into statements from major corporations and their take on net neutrality and when it was recently I believe this was when it was revoked by President Trump. And so I looked in, and I was actually slightly surprised to see that a lot of these bigger corporations like Amazon, Microsoft, Netflix, Facebook, and such, were actually very disappointed about the elimination of net neutrality, and how they were hoping to fight for an open and fair internet, and how that should have been the staple, and they were disappointed that it was being revoked initially. Now I was surprised because I didn't expect this, and maybe I'm wrong to think that, but I wasn't too educated on net neutrality before coming into this. But I feel like I would have assumed that they wouldn't have, if anything, they wouldn't have cared, or as a last resort, probably would be in some way happy about it, because they would have wanted to be prioritized, and have good service on their end, and not so much on the competition. Now to move on, number 5. I believe we had to look into a case in 2016, a dispute between the United States Telecom Association and the FCC's Open Internet Order. We are asked, what 3 practices does the Open Internet Order prohibit? So the Open Internet Order prohibits the practices of blocking, throttling, and paid prioritization of internet traffic and general discrimination against certain connections. By the end of this, the court had ruled in favor of the order, and this was a major net neutrality win. Number 6, we had to search for an article named Open versus Closed, What Kind of Internet Do We Want? What is the difference between open and closed internet? So, according to Technopedia, which I thought was a funny name, this is a website. I found the article, but then couldn't find a good definition on the article. So I looked it up, and I found Technopedia, and it defined open internet as a concept in which information across the World Wide Web is equally free and available without variables that depend on the financial motives of internet service providers or ISPs. So on the other hand, a closed internet would be the opposite. It is not equally free and available, and is very dependent on financial motives of ISPs. Now, this is very much related to net neutrality, which I believe was the second part of the question, because net neutrality as a whole fights to keep an open internet for all users, and it works to prevent any unequal access dependent on any financial gain for ISPs. Now, to move on into the what do you think questions. The first one is, do you support the idea that internet traffic should flow freely? And yes, I do. I very much support the idea that internet traffic should flow freely. All internet users should have the same connection rates when accessing content online without any worry of having their access discriminated against for any reason. Number 2, to move on, I believe is very much related, of do you believe that the U.S. government should regulate the internet as a common carrier? I wrote, in my document to read off of, I wrote, to a point, I believe that the U.S. government should regulate the internet to prohibit any unfair blocking and discrimination against specific user connections. All internet users should be allowed to access the web freely and fairly. Despite this, I think that the regulation would need to stop at a certain point, because I worry of the idea of too much regulation. So in all, I believe the government should regulate it enough to ensure an open internet policy, but it should stop there. Now, number 3 just asks, were you aware of the net neutrality controversy? Now, overall, I wasn't too educated on this topic before this lesson. I was somewhat aware that it was something that happened. I mean, I heard buzzwords around it. I heard net neutrality and it being revoked and this and that and the other. Saw YouTube videos when it was going on about why this is not good and whatnot, but I never really thought to educate myself on it. That being said, I feel like I did learn a lot from this lesson as a whole. I feel like it not only allowed me to feel much more educated and have a better understanding on the topic, but it finally gave me a chance to form a good enough opinion on it, that I wouldn't just be hearing something and going with it. That I was able to sit down and read about it and come up with my own opinion on it. I have my own take on it. Now, I believe that was everything for our issue and what to go over. So thank you.